All right, I wanted to go over chapter 2 homework problem. This again is difficult, especially if you haven't had any accounting experience before. So let's just go over it. And again, I'll go in and kind of adjust some of those grades if they're not exactly written in the same way. So let's go over the first question. The first question is, what was the cost of raw materials put into production that year? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my beginning balance. So let's say you have raw materials in an inventory. So you know at the beginning of the year you started with $32,000 worth of inventory. Throughout the entire year you purchased an additional $480,000. So at some point during the year you had $512,000 worth of material to be used. At the end of the year somebody goes back into inventory and says, okay, we have $60,000 left. So to find out what you used, I'm just going to go ahead and subtract 60,000. So we used $452,000 of raw material. Okay. So how much of the materials above consisted of indirect material? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take a look up here, and we had 452,000 of total raw materials. So we had 327,000 of direct materials. Raw materials will either be direct or indirect. Direct materials mean that it's something that can easily be traced to what you're making. So for example, if you're making a bicycle, it'll be the seat and the tires and the handlebars and the basket, stuff that's super easy to trace. The indirect material is going to be stuff that's not so easy to trace. So that might be the oil that is used to lubricate the wheels and the chain, or it might be some of the smaller bolts that they use and things like that that are not cost effective to trace the cost of. We're going to go ahead and put those into indirect materials. So we have a total of 452,000 in materials, 327 is in direct materials. So that must mean that 125,000 is in indirect. Okay. For the third one, how much of the factory labor cost for the year consisted of indirect labor? So again, we have direct labor and we have indirect labor. Direct labor are those people that are directly working on building those bicycles. They're easily traced. You know how much you're paying them an hour, and you probably have a pretty good idea of how many hours it takes to build one bike. But that's not the only thing that keeps that factory open, right? You need janitors and you need maintenance people and you need supervisors. You need other people to help in building your bicycle. So that's where that indirect labor comes from. So let's take a look at our factory wages. Excuse me. Factory wages are going to consist of direct and indirect labor. So at the beginning of the year, we had 14,000 that we had accrued from the previous year. We don't really care about that. We incurred a total of $182,000 in payables. So at some point throughout the year, we owed $182,000 in factory wages. So I'm going to take that number. We paid $174,000, but it doesn't matter what we paid. All we care about is what we actually accrued. So our direct labor was $159,000. So I'm just going to subtract out 159. So our indirect, excuse me, our indirect labor must have been 23,000. Okay. What was the cost of goods manufactured for the year? So in that one, so you don't have to, fortunately, do any calculation. What we're going to take for the cost of goods manufactured is the credits that we have in work in process. And what that means is $500,000 worth of stuff, worth of cost, and that includes materials and labor, both indirect and direct. Well, it's all going to be mostly direct materials and direct labor, went from in process to finished. So $500,000 worth of direct materials and direct labor went now into finished goods. So that's our cost of goods manufactured. I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. All right, number 5, what was the cost of goods sold for the year? Cost of goods sold for the year is, first, I'm going to take my cost of goods manufactured at $500,000. And that's what we made throughout the year. That's not what we sold. So the next thing I need to do is look at my finished goods. My finished goods is what was available for sale. So that $500,000 that was in work in process now went into finished goods. So we started with a balance of $50,000. We added that $500,000. And then what happened was somebody went into the back and realized that we still had $132,000 left. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract that out. So we sold $418,000 worth of stuff. Now that's not our revenue. That's just the cost to us to make that material. So 418,000. Okay. Number 6, if overhead is applied to production on the basis of direct labor, what was the rate in effect during the year? So for this overhead allocation, what I want you to think about in this case is we have all this stuff that we cannot easily allocate to each bicycle that we're making. So we're going to have to figure out a way to best allocate that. And there are several ways to do it. One of the ways is to say, okay, well, we're going to estimate that for every labor hour that we pay, there's going to be X amount of overhead. And that's what we're going to do this time. And how do we figure that out? Well, if it's direct labor, we're just going to take these two numbers. So we're going to take direct labor of 159,000 and divide it by our overhead cost of 262,350. Oops, I'm sorry, 262,350. So we're saying that basically for every dollar in labor hour that we pay, we are also incurring $1.65 in overhead. Okay, so that's 1.65. So now, was overhead underapplied or overapplied, and by how much? What that means is we estimate, right? At the beginning of the year, we're estimating 1.65%, or I guess 165%. So then at the end of the year, we can kind of estimate how we did with that. We have to estimate at the beginning of the year because we're going to have to kind of figure out what our costs are going to be as we manufacture these products. So let's see how we did on our estimation. And the way we do that is we're just going to go back up here to our T counts. So our manufacturing overhead was 213,000, our estimate, and then our actual overhead was 262,350. So let's take the difference, 262,350 minus 213. So we have a difference of $49,000. So we have essentially over-applied our overhead by that amount. Let me go back down here. Get my calculator. Okay. So we over-applied by 49,350. So maybe a 1.65 overhead amount is a little bit high, and that was over-applied. We might want to revisit that one. All right, so we are computing the ending balance in the work in process inventory account. So we're assuming that this balance is, consists entirely of goods started at the beginning of the year. We had 32,700 in direct labor. So let's just fill that in right now. So we had 32,700. And since we used that 1.65 number, I'm going to multiply that by times 1.65. So we had 53,955 in manufacturing overhead. 53,955. And then we need to get our ending balance in the work in process. So let's go back up to our T accounts. Work in process, the ending balance. We are going to add all the debit side together and subtract the credits. So 76,000 plus 327,000 plus 159 plus 262,350 minus 500,000. So 324,350. Yeah, I don't remember what that was. 324,350. 324,350. Okay. So here is chapter 2, the homework problem. And again, if you didn't get all this, it's a difficult concept, especially if you haven't had any accounting previously and because it's online. So just go over it a couple times, familiarize yourself with it. If you can kind of follow along with the book and understand how everything kind of goes down, I think you'll be in good shape.